I want you to picture right now the most powerful pirate in human history. Just, close your eyes and really conjure up that image.
Oh, I know exactly what you're seeing.
Right. I'm guessing you're picturing a guy, probably with this wild, salt-crusted beard, maybe a peg leg.
Definitely a parrot on the shoulder.
Exactly, a parrot, shouting orders from the deck of this single battered galleon somewhere in the Caribbean. We just have this highly specific, basically cinematic stereotype burned into our collective brains about what piracy actually looks like.
Yeah, it's the classic Hollywood trope. It's binary, it's simple, and it's entirely focused on this rugged, individualistic male outlaw relying on pure brute force.
Hmm.
I mean, we really like our history neatly categorized like that.
We do. But what if I told you that the real pirate king, like the most successful, terrifyingly powerful pirate to ever sail the oceans, was actually a woman?
Which completely shatters that entire stereotype.
It totally does, and that is exactly what we are doing today. In this deep dive, we are pulling the source material on Zheng Yi Sao. And just to give you the immediate jaw-dropping scale of what we are dealing with here, at her peak in the early 1800s, she commanded an empire of 80,000 outlaws and a fleet of 1,800 ships.
Which is just a number that forces us to completely recalibrate our understanding of maritime history. I mean, let's put that in some historical context for you really quick.
Yeah, please do.
So, if you look at the UK's Royal Navy, right,
Yeah.
which was widely considered the absolute apex maritime superpower of that era, at their undisputed height, they had fewer than 1,000 ships.
Wow.
Yeah. She absolutely dwarfed the British Empire's naval capacity.
That is just wild.
Mhm.
And that is the mission of our deep dive today. We are looking at how a woman who started out completely invisible, living on the floating docks of China, somehow rose to force the absolute surrender of 3 global empires.
It's incredible.
We're going to dig into the historical sources to uncover how she did it, because honestly, it is a masterclass in strategy, in power dynamics, and in building a system that is just, well, stronger than the state itself.
Absolutely. And to understand how she built this massive floating nation, we have to examine the absolute bottom of the social ladder where she started.
Yeah.
Because her origins totally dictated her entire worldview and her management style.
Right. So we are in Canton, China in the late 1700s, and she is working on what the sources called the flower boats.
Right. And these were floating entertainment vessels catering to laborers, merchants, and travelers passing through these really busy ports. It was essentially a life of servitude and basic survival.
Yeah, to the ruling elite, she was completely invisible.
Totally invisible. But this environment, it actually functioned as a brutal, high-stakes academy for her. I mean, think about it. On these boats, you are constantly managing the egos of very dangerous men.
Oh, for sure.
You are overhearing the trade routes of wealthy merchants, and you are learning the grim realities of economics firsthand. Her daily survival required this incredibly cold-blooded understanding of power and, well, human nature.
She's seeing the world without any polite veneer. She sees what actually motivates people: fear, greed, survival. And she's surviving in this harsh ecosystem until the year 1801.
Right, which is the turning point.
Exactly. That's when the pirate commander, Zheng Yi, who already has this really formidable fleet, captures her. Now, normally, if you read these historical accounts, the story of a captive ends right there.
It's usually a very short, tragic story.
Right. But she doesn't act like a captive at all. I was reading this part of our sources, and it reads less like a kidnapping and much more like a hostile corporate takeover.
It really does. She didn't just plead for her life. Instead, she analyzed his operational vulnerabilities because she realized Zheng Yi actually needed her.
Wait, he needed her? He's the one with the pirate fleet.
Yeah, but he was drawn to her reputation. She had this immense intelligence and, more importantly, vast underworld connections. I mean, she had spent years building a mental database of who was trading what, where the vulnerabilities in the port were, and, crucially, which government officials could be bought.
Okay, I hear that, but I'm still struggling to understand the leverage here. If you were literally a captive on a pirate ship in 1801, how do you counter a kidnapping with a business proposition?
Because she understood that Zheng Yi had hit a plateau. Sure, he had a fleet, but he didn't have the massive intelligence network or the administrative mind required to scale his operation into a true empire.
Oh, so she was the missing piece.
Exactly. She offered him the missing piece of his puzzle, but only under the absolute strictest conditions. She demanded a formal binding contract.
Wow.
Yeah, she agreed to marry him and join his operation, but, and this is key, She was guaranteed a 50% share of all his loot, and even more importantly, a 50% share of his authority.
She negotiated a 50-50 equity split with a pirate warlord while being his prisoner. I mean, that changes the entire dynamic.
Completely.
She's not a captive at all, she's a co-founder. And for 6 years, this joint venture just flourishes. They conquer rival fleets, they build this massive coalition that becomes known as the Red Flag Fleet.
They were unstoppable.
But the true test of any corporate structure, right, is what happens when the CEO suddenly dies.
And in 1807, that exact crisis hits. A massive typhoon strikes the coast, and her husband, Zheng Yi, is killed at sea.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because historically, the death of a pirate leader is almost always an immediate death sentence for the entire organization.
It was usually just a bloodbath.
Right. There's no HR department. There's no clear line of succession. You have 80,000 heavily armed, lawless, violent criminals. How does one woman in 1807 stop them from just tearing each other apart, burning the fleet down, and taking her out in the process?
Well, she filled that leadership vacuum instantly through this just unparalleled display of organizational genius. She didn't try to stop the violence through, personal charisma alone. She completely industrialized the pirate fleet.
Industrialized it.
Yeah, she understood a fundamental truth about human behavior. 80,000 outlaws will only remain loyal to you if they fear their own internal system more than they fear the Chinese Navy.
So she basically built a bureaucracy of terror.
That is the perfect way to describe it.
Right.
She instituted her own laws. We historically call it the Pirate Code, but that implies, a loose set of guidelines.
Like suggestion.
Right. But this was a rigid, lethal constitution. It was swift and it was final. If you disobeyed an order from a superior, beheaded on the spot.
Wow. No trial.
No trial. If you stole so much as a single coin from the communal treasury, beheaded. Everything that was looted had to be registered, put into a central warehouse, and then distributed very methodically. 20% went to the pirate who seized it, and 80% went to the state, her state.
But logistically, how do you even enforce a complex tax code on a massive fleet of illiterate outlaws in the early 19th century? Without computers, without digital ledgers, how is she actually making sure a pirate isn't just hiding gold in his boots?
She deployed a highly sophisticated physical auditing system. The Red Flag Fleet actually employed dedicated fleet accountants.
Pirate accountants.
Pirate accountants. When a ship was raided, the cargo manifest of the captured vessel was cross-referenced with the physical goods brought to her central warehouses. She issued physical tokens and receipts.
That's brilliant.
And if the math didn't add up, the commanders of that raiding party were held personally responsible. And again, the auditing was enforced by terror. When people see their crewmates executed publicly for pocketing a single piece of silver, compliance becomes universal very quickly.
She essentially invented a central banking and taxation system for criminals. It's wild. But the part of the code that really stopped me in my tracks when reading the sources was her policy on female captives.
Yes. What's fascinating here is that she instituted an absolutely unprecedented policy. If any pirate mistreated, assaulted, or harassed a female captive, the punishment was immediate death.
Immediate death.
No exceptions whatsoever. And if a pirate wished to marry a captive, they had to be formally granted permission, and they had to remain entirely faithful to her. Infidelity was also punishable by death.
So from a purely strategic standpoint, setting aside her own background on the flyer boats for a second, why make that specific act the ultimate crime?
Because managing a mob requires mitigating the sources of internal friction. Unregulated base urges lead to internal conflict, right? Fighting over captives, resentment, and ultimately chaos.
That makes total sense.
By protecting the women and strictly regulating marriages, she forced discipline onto an undisciplined populace. She transformed a chaotic mob into a highly disciplined, high-functioning military machine. She basically domesticated her own pirates.
It's a staggering sociological achievement. She took the most ungovernable people on Earth and made them the most governed people in China. And so the Red Flag Fleet just becomes a leviathan.
It really does.
Which brings us to the inevitable clash. Because when a criminal syndicate becomes more organized, more disciplined, and more effective than the actual government, well, the empire has no choice but to strike back.
Exactly. The Qing dynasty was facing a direct threat to its sovereignty. You cannot have a shadow government controlling your primary trade routes, especially when the Qing economy relied so heavily on taxation from maritime commerce.
They were losing control.
The emperor was completely losing his grip on the southern coast. And the political fragility of his regime just could not tolerate a rival state operating in its own waters.
So the emperor sends the Chinese Imperial Navy to crush her, and I'm picturing this massive armada sailing out to just wipe the pirates off the map. But instead of fleeing, she obliterates them.
Completely dismantles them.
And not only does she destroy their ships, she captures the surviving sailors and absorbs them directly into the Red Flag fleet. Like the emperor's attempt to weaken her literally made her stronger.
She weaponized their own military against them. And the panic this caused in the imperial palace was profound. Trade was grinding to a halt. The emperor realized his own forces were just completely inadequate.
So he's so desperate that he goes to the extreme. He decides, okay, I can't beat her with my own navy. I'm going to hire the big guns. He hires the British East India Company and the Portuguese Navy to wipe her out.
Yes.
And here's where it gets really interesting. We are now looking at a situation where one woman's fleet is engaged in a 2-year sustained war against the 3 most powerful navies on the planet simultaneously.
Which raises a really important question regarding military technology. How does a pirate fleet go toe-to-toe with heavily armored, technologically advanced European galleons?
Right, because they shouldn't be able to.
Exactly. The British ships of the line were floating fortresses. They had deep V hulls designed for ocean crossing, massive broadside cannons, superior range, heavy timber armor. I mean, in a traditional deep-water naval battle, the pirates should have been annihilated.
But she doesn't fight them in deep water, does she?
No, she doesn't.
Yeah.
Her tactical genius lay in weaponizing the geography of the coastline itself. She knew the Pearl River Delta intimately. She knew the shifting mudflats, the fog banks, and most importantly, the extreme tidal shifts.
Ah, the tides.
Yeah. Her fleet was composed primarily of junks. These were vessels with flat bottoms, shallow drafts, and batten sails that could catch the wind from almost any angle.
Oh, I see where this is going. If I'm commanding a massive British galleon, I need deep water to maneuver. If I get lured into a shallow estuary.
The heavy cannons become entirely useless. She would send a small detachment of her junks to feign vulnerability, drawing the British and Portuguese commanders into the complex network of the Delta. And as the tide receded, the massive European galleons would beach themselves in the mud. They couldn't even turn to aim their broadside cannons.
And once they were stuck, she just swarmed them.
Hundreds of her shallow draft junks would descend on the trapped galleons. The European navies tried various countermeasures, of course. They sent fire ships. These were vessels loaded with explosives and set ablaze sailing into her anchored fleet, hoping to cause a massive chain reaction.
Which is a terrifying tactic. How do you even defend against floating bombs?
Well, she relied on that rigorous discipline she had instilled in her crew. Instead of panicking and breaking formation like a normal pirate crew would, her men calmly rowed out in small boats, attached grappling hooks to the explosive ships, and used the currents to redirect them right back into the Imperial and European fleets.
That is unbelievable. She used the environment as her primary weapon. And while she's fighting this global superpower war, she's also running a highly lucrative business. Let's talk about her business model, because she established a literal subscription service for the ocean.
She did. It functioned like a macroeconomic protection racket, but highly systemized. If you were a merchant ship crossing the South China Sea, or a salt trader, or even just a coastal fishing village, you had to buy a safe conduct pass from the Red Flag fleet.
Like a toll.
Exactly. You paid your tax to her accountants, and she gave you a physical, stamped document. If you had that document, her 80,000 pirates would leave you alone. And furthermore, they would actively protect you from other rival pirate gangs.
It's literally like a modern software subscription, but for physical safety. And if you didn't pay the tax...
You disappeared. Your ship was taken, your cargo was seized, and your crew was either conscripted or killed. I mean, she controlled the economy of the South China Sea more effectively than the emperor did. The Qing government couldn't guarantee safe passage, but Zheng Yi Sao absolutely could.
War is an incredibly expensive endeavor, though. Building ships, paying soldiers, firing cannons, it drains a treasury fast. In any protracted conflict, someone eventually runs out of money. And the shocking twist of this whole deep dive is that the person who ran out of money wasn't the pirate.
No, it wasn't. After 2 brutal years of failure, the Qing emperor faced total bankruptcy. His military was exhausted, his economy was choked off by her blockades, and the cost of hiring foreign mercenaries was just unsustainable.
He was trapped.
He had no moves left. The only logical path forward for him was to offer an amnesty.
Which is crazy, because if you are a normal criminal and the massive government that has been trying to kill you for 2 years suddenly says, hey, we'll forgive you if you just go away, you take the money, you run for the hills, and you never look back.
Naturally.
But Zheng Yi Sao is operating on a totally different level. Her next move is honestly like a cartel boss casually strolling through the front doors of FBI headquarters, sitting down at the director's desk, and demanding that the government hire them.
It really is. Because she knew she held all the leverage. She didn't accept the emperor's initial amnesty terms because she didn't have to. In 1810, she took matters into her own hands and walked directly into the governor's office in Canton.
Just walked right in.
Walked right in. And the crucial detail here is her presentation. She walked in completely unarmed, accompanied only by a few female attendants.
She walks into the heart of the government that wants her dead without weapons because she knows her administrative system is stronger than their military power.
Exactly.
She sits down and she dictates the terms of her own surrender.
Now, the history books call it a surrender, but functionally it was an unconditional victory. The terms she extracted were unheard of. First, she demanded that she and all her commanders retain every ounce of the vast wealth they had accumulated.
Wow. So no asset forfeiture at all?
None. There would be no asset forfeiture.
What else?
Second, she demanded the right to maintain a small, private fleet of ships. She claimed it was strictly for business purposes, which effectively secured her ongoing monopoly over the lucrative regional salt trade.
Of course.
And third, and perhaps most remarkably, her 80,000 pirates were not merely pardoned, they were absorbed directly into the Chinese military apparatus.
Wait, she got her pirate fleet government pensions.
She literally forced the empire to hire her outlaw fleet as their official coast guard. They were given military ranks, legitimate salaries, and societal respectability. The very people who had spent a decade terrorizing the government were now the government's official naval enforcement.
She wins on every conceivable front. It's just brilliant. Which leads us to her legacy. Usually these stories end with, a betrayal or a dramatic execution in a public square. The outlaw always falls, but not her.
No, not her. She is arguably the only major pirate commander in recorded history to retire with her head, her immense wealth, and her dignity completely intact.
That is so rare.
It is. She transitioned flawlessly back into civilian life. She opened a highly successful gambling house in Canton. She remained a really powerful, influential figure in the city's economic life, and she lived peacefully to the age of 69.
A full, prosperous life. So what does this all mean? When we peel back the Hollywood myths of the swashbuckling pirate, what is the actual takeaway from the life of Zheng Yi Sao?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, her life fundamentally challenges our understanding of power and rebellion. Society conditions us to equate piracy and marginalized criminality in general with pure chaos.
Right. We think of it as the opposite of order.
Exactly. But Zheng Yi Sao proved that chaos doesn't win wars. The only way to defeat a massive entrenched system like a global empire is not through brute force. It's by building a better, more disciplined, more rigorous system than the one you were fighting. She literally outgoverned the king government.
It's a fascinating lens to look through. For you listening, what does this all mean for you? Think about how you manage the chaos in your own life or in your own work. When you're faced with an overwhelming challenge or a massive competitor, the instinct is often to just fight harder, to use brute force, to scramble and react.
Which rarely works.
Right. Zheng Yi Sao teaches us that victory doesn't go to the loudest, or the most chaotic, or even the most heavily armed. It goes to the person who builds the most indestructible infrastructure. It's about rigorous systems over brute force.
She truly understood that true power is structural. By the time the British, the Portuguese, and the Chinese realized the sheer depth of the bureaucracy she had built on the water, it was already way too late to tear it down.
Which leaves us with a lingering final thought. We started this deep dive talking about that classic pirate stereotype, the bearded man with the parrot, and how completely it blinded us to the reality of the greatest pirate who ever lived.
It really does make you think.
It does. It makes you wonder if the ultimate key to shaping history is strict organizational infrastructure rather than just noisy traditional brute force. How many other invisible, marginalized figures throughout history might have quietly built massive empires of their own? Empires that the traditional establishment written textbooks simply refused to record because they couldn't handle the truth of who was actually in charge.
That's a great point. We prefer our history to feature recognizable heroes and villains. But as we've seen today, the most potent forces are often born in the absolute margins, operating right under the establishment's nose.
The muddy waters, the invisible docks. Just remember that the next time someone tells you how history was made.